Nature has an order, a power to restore balance. I believe he is that power. We call him Godzilla.
Let's start with how the movie is shot, mainly how Edwards shoots the giant monsters. First of all, I think the film is beautifully directed, shot, and overall put together. Edwards knows how to control an audience's emotions with just the camera and enhance the story's impact with how he shoots it. As I mentioned before, Godzilla's first appearance is awesome and treated as epically and importantly as it should be, especially since he hasn't been in a movie in 10 years. Edwards builds up that tilt up Godzilla's body so well that it truly does elicit the proper cheers and jaw drops from the audience. Now, this kind of wait-and-see style of shooting the monsters is really effective in that sense. The film effectively evokes the power and awe-inspiring nature of their size and destructive capabilities. This is definitely one of the most well-directed and shot films in recent memory for me. However, while waiting to see the monsters and not lingering on them for too long is a good idea in theory and works in quite a few scenes, Edwards does it throughout the entire movie, and especially in regards to Godzilla, it gets really frustrating really quickly. Every time we start to get a good look at him and see him do something cool, we cut away very quickly to the humans. Now, I get why Edwards does it this way. The idea is that we never see too much of Godzilla or the monsters fighting, that it loses its maximum effect. Also so that the scale and power of the monsters and fighting is never lost, which is why we never cut away from the humans particularly forward for too long. This is a fantastic idea in theory. However, in practice, what ends up happening is that the audience leaves the theater feeling like they didn't get enough of what they paid for, namely Godzilla kicking ass. It's a great way to present a monster movie. However, like anything, too much of it gets frustrating after a while. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that what we do get to see of Godzilla, and more importantly of Godzilla kicking the Muto's ass, is bad. To the absolute contrary. The monster fights in this movie are awesome. They're more animalistic and raw fights than classic Godzilla fights. Godzilla and the Mutos are clearly fighting for their lives, and in both cases for the future of their species. So they really go at each other, biting, stabbing, ramming, clobbering, and blasting the hell out of each other. Godzilla fights like a big predator should, using his mass to overpower his opponent. Like the scene where he straightens his posture up and kicks the female Muto to the ground and puts his foot down on her throat. He fights like a big bear, and that's awesome. But also, the flying male Muto forces him to be more cunning and agile, having to grab the male with his mouth and throwing and most impressively slamming him into a building with his tail. That move was fantastic and is really only possible thanks to the spectacular CGI, which will bring us into the special effects. Next to the modern Planet of the Apes series, this is some of the best CGI in recent memory, nearly perfectly blending the live analog action with the digital effects. Now, I know everyone had tons of reservations about Godzilla being done in CGI after what happened in 1998, and also about how well a more traditional Godzilla design would translate into CG, myself included. But seeing the finished product, it's done perfectly. Godzilla and the Mutos look amazing. They look, move, and behave like real living creatures, and each monster, like the Suitimation days, ascends the manner in which the special effects brings them to life and convinces the audience of their realism in the film. Godzilla in particular truly comes to life in this movie. He looks absolutely photoreal. And what I love is that he takes moments to breathe, recover, and react in ways that real creatures do. Two scenes jump to mind that demonstrate this. The first is after Godzilla kills the male Muto with his tail, and he just stops for a few seconds to breathe, and then reacts with shock that the building is about to fall on him. It's a nice moment where the movie slows down and shows that these creatures are real, and that they aren't just unemotional forces of nature. They have feelings. And the second one demonstrates this even better, right after, when Ford is running to the docks, having been kicked around and exhausted by the night's events. He stops to catch his breath and looks up to see Godzilla crushed under the building right next to him. I love this moment. The two lock eyes and have a really emotional moment which prompts Ford to keep fighting. Because in this moment, Ford and the audience just get to appreciate the majesty of Godzilla, but also that he's alive and feels pain. Godzilla's face isn't one of rage or monstrousness. He looks old and tired, worn down from the fight for nature's balance, but seeming to acknowledge Ford and motivate him to not give up, even if you are crushed under a building. It's a beautiful moment and made truly exquisite by the incredible detail on Godzilla's face and expressions, which is thanks in large part to the talent they sought after to help in bringing the monsters to life, including Weta and Andy Serkis, the greatest motion capture actor in the industry. Overall, the special effects are top-notch, and have truly demonstrated that a CG Godzilla can not only work, but can bring so much to the character that Suitimation simply never could given its limitations. Now, there's only one other major thing I want to talk about. Again, I know this review is crazy long, but I promise this is the last major thing, and that is the music and the sound design. Alexander Despot's score is fantastic. It has creepy, slow build-up and exciting, heart-pounding crescendos befitting of a great monster movie score, but also quieter, more string-based cues that enhance the more emotional scenes, whether they be human-based ones like Sandra Brody's death and the collapse of Janjira, or monster-based scenes like Godzilla and Ford's moment where they both look at each other. But my favorite cues are definitely the wave marking Godzilla's arrival, the use of Requiem from 2001: A Space Odyssey during the Halo jump, and the ending theme Back to the Sea, which is a triumphant piece befitting Godzilla's exit upon winning the battle. Excellent music score. Now, what's interesting about it is that I know a lot of people, again, including myself, were really hoping that the original Godzilla theme by Akira Ifukube would be in there, and were definitely disappointed that it was left out. Now, again, I don't know what their reasoning was, whether it was like some kind of legal thing where they just couldn't use the music because they didn't have the rights to it, or if they just left it out because it wasn't a piece that Alexander Despot recorded himself. But I do think it works, because one thing that I think people should remember is that not every single Godzilla movie uses the classic theme. Some of the best ones, in fact, leave it out, especially in regards to reboots. Like The Return of Godzilla from '84. The theme isn't in there at all. The soundtrack is completely original, and it completely works, being an epic modern revival to Godzilla. And I think Alexander Despot's score for this movie works in the same way. Sure, the theme song isn't in there, but it really feels like Godzilla, and really draws the audience into the emotional weight of the situation, and does befit a modern revival of Godzilla. Also, it's kind of in there in the main opening credits theme, so it is certainly part of it, but I do wish we would have gotten the classic theme in some capacity. It would have really hammered home this being a tried and true Godzilla movie. Even if they just would have had it in the closing credits, like in Godzilla 2000 and GMK. But the last thing I want to bring up is the sound design, mainly the monsters' roars. They're powerful, earth-shattering, and effectively relate what the monsters are doing or how they're feeling. The reworking of Godzilla's roar in particular is very strong, retaining all of its classic elements while also giving it a new spin, similar to what was done in the Heisei and Millennium series. However, while the sound design is excellent for the most part, there are a few noticeable and annoying moments where certain sounds either don't exist and should, or don't carry and should. The former is that rarely do you hear or feel the monster's footsteps, and them being as big as they are in this movie, you really ought to. And also, there's a massive precedent precedence in classic Godzilla movies for Godzilla's thunderous footsteps marking his arrival, in particular the original movie. That's the first thing we hear from him, so we really should have heard them in this movie. The latter is really only one moment, but it's one of the film's major moments, and it really bugs me. When Godzilla emerges from the smoke and roars directly into the camera during the San Francisco fight, his roar lasts for like 25 seconds, but never really ends per se. The camera just cuts away and the roar is cut off, and then we're just left with silence, followed by the female Muto roaring. It should have either ended during the sequence of Godzilla roaring into the camera, or carried into the next shot when the female Muto roars, and they could have kind of blended together, which could have been really cool. But those two things are of course massive, massive nitpicks. So, with almost 2.5 hours of audio recorded, let's get into the conclusion. All in all, Godzilla 2014 is an entertaining, well-made monster movie that is always an enjoyable experience every time I pop it in. However, it is a heavily flawed film that's sadly disappointing in the area where it really needed to be amazing, as a modern Godzilla movie. Again, not that it's a poor adaptation or disrespectful to the character, but that it's not enough about him and doesn't effectively reintroduce him to a modern audience. Also suffering from being a movie that at many points is too forcibly designed to fit a certain mold rather than letting things flow naturally. However, while its execution is sometimes shaky, its ideas are really strong, and its reverence for the source material really shines through, making many references to classic Godzilla films, like that now famous moment where you cut to a fish tank early in the movie where you see that Mothra is written on it and there's a hatched cocoon inside of it, and one that's more subtle later in the movie but I think is supposed to be a reference to classic Godzilla, where you cut to a Chinese dragon's head being swallowed in gasoline, and the head looks very much so like one of Ghidorah's heads, but that one I'm not so sure about. But more importantly than that even, the film retains the core themes of nature's power and nuclear devastation that have kept Godzilla relevant, popular, and poignant for over 60 years. So after 5 years of build-up, dozens of videos, the formation of a podcasting network, and me meeting several of my now closest friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to rate Godzilla 2014. And this was one of the most difficult things that I have ever had to do. Again, this movie has so much good, but it does fall short in many areas. So all in all, I am going to give Godzilla 2014 a solid 4 out of 5. It's an entertaining movie, it's a well-made movie, but it does fall a bit short as a Godzilla movie, which is where that point went. Well, it looks like that finally concludes my overly long, definitely, analysis of Godzilla 2014 and my addendum to Godzilla Palooza. However, before I go, I would like to kind of give some sense of closure to this video, since sadly we're going to have to wait another really long time for the next Godzilla movie. With Legendary greenlighting 2 sequels to this movie, making this a Godzilla trilogy, which is awesome, but sadly not putting the release date until 2018, because Gareth Edwards had to go off and make a Star Wars movie. But despite all the problems with their marketing, despite all the problems the film has, you gotta give Legendary props, because they certainly resurrected Godzilla in a big bad way. The franchise is back. We've got comics still going on at IDW. We've got a PS3 and PS4 game coming to America this summer for the first time since Godzilla Unleashed, which is also awesome. So at least we do have something to tide us over until Godzilla 2, which again is a really far and long away. So it looks like I'm not going to have to bring that back this series until then. So cool, I can give Godzilla Palooza a nice little 4-year-long rest until I get to come back and overanalyze another Godzilla movie for you guys. Huh? What was that? No, you can't be serious. What do you mean Toho's making another Godzilla movie separate from Legendary? And it's coming out when? Oh, alright, I see. Thank you, non-existent producer. You're very helpful as always. Well, kids, looks like I'm not going to be able to give Godzilla Palooza as long of a rest as I thought, because I will be back with you next year in 2016 when we get into Toho's next independent Godzilla movie. I hope you'll join me for that review. So until next time, kids, sayonara.